Afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. This is for everybody's information. It's the final episode of the What Is Suffering podcast with Kal Holczler.
For now.
For now, the suffering will continue. I can assure everybody.
Will continue. Hopefully, the suffering won't. But yeah,
But
we got to have 4 solid, almost hours of conversation about a lot of JP, Jordan Peterson's ideas about suffering, our conceptions of suffering. So I think it was a good conversation. I think it's a good time to wrap it up for the moment.
Well, I think there's two things. I'm a little bit starting to be disenchanted a little bit with not so much Jordan Peterson, but with Ben Shapiro, and I'll explain to you why, and then I'll also explain. I think this is a bit where Kal and I actually butt heads on some outlooks, specifically in regards to climate change. So I want to talk about that during the episode, and I also want to talk about the direction of where we're leaping in the suffering podcast to. I think we've experimented
where we might go from there. Yeah,
exactly. Where we're thinking of actually going with our next step, and then kind of I think we want to try and succinctly summarize, what the theme of suffering, meant for both of us.
So why don't you go first? Yeah, or you want me to go first?
Oh, I think you like, if we look at a suffering sort of, I think if I went second, it would be kind of anticlimactic. I think because so let me go first, because the suffering piece is not really, I've been blessed, or I've been very, very fortunate in my life not to have a tremendous amount of suffering, and I wonder if at all other people's suffering, if you process it properly, should make you a better person. I mean,
well, the question was not should we suffer or how much should we suffer. The question was more, well, the inquiry was a bit more on what is suffering. So I think you have a lot to offer from a psychological and philosophical standpoint. Like, for you as a gentleman living in the 21st century, living in the Western world, knowing what you know about philosophy, knowing what you know about religion, culture, like, I think it's a good, any hypothesis based on a little bit of on your experience could still be very useful.
Yeah, I read a quote recently. Of course, I kind of breeze through a lot of things, and when I'm reading, and you have to think: do you pause and make note of it, so that in a situation like this, I can refer to actually either the verse or the specific book and section and paragraph and all that. So most of the times I don't.
Hold on. Are you trying to say that you're privileged? Are you trying to say that you're privileged, living a white male living in a Western society, disregarding all the suffering in the world, all the death in the world, all the pain in the world? You're like, suffering? Don't know anything about it.
No. I'm saying I have the privilege of, when I read, I don't always. I was going to bring a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it, and it has to do with the only God there is strife. And so I don't know who said it, but it was interesting because it stuck in my head this week from whatever I was reading.
Only God there is strife.
Right, like the only God there is strife.
Said the new atheist. Right.
Oh, was it the new atheist? Yeah, I don't know. But hey, well, you'd have to admit, Kal, if that was
you get God and nihilism together, you get the new atheist. It's like,
the new. Well, but you have to admit that if that was one of the tenets of their their faith, the idea here would be that there is some wisdom in that, right? I mean, it made me pause for a minute and think about.
Well, don't confuse. Well, I wouldn't collide arrogance and ignorance with wisdom.
Okay, yeah,
But
fair enough.
okay, so let's spell it out for a second. Or do you want to move on and talk about suffering, or do you want to like dissect that quote? What that actually meant? Like
Well,
what took you?
well, it's interesting because I'm kind of getting the vibe that the criticism from the Cal perspective is that that's not even close to what God is, right? And that is a
I
different.
think it's only one. I think it's very shallow. I think all it says is like there's so much about the world we don't know and don't understand, and it's going to take so much effort and strife to unpack the question that humanity has been wrestling with forever. And rather than going into the depth of things, human experience, nature itself, the meaning of life, all those very specific inquiries that are heavy, it's kind of like saying, no, man has suffered so much. The nature of man is to suffer. And the way we can justify his suffering is by invent this thing called God. That's kind of what that quote would mean to me. But the only
Well,
real
see,
God there is strife, meaning human beings suffer, period. We
yeah, yeah.
suffer some more, period. And the way we kind of like, it's the whole like communistic, the opium of the masses kind of idea. Only God there is strife, meaning that's all really there exists. Like at the core of everything is just strife. I mean, it's fairly nihilistic.
Well, yeah, but see, the thing is that I didn't really take it that way. I mean, I can see what your point
Oh,
is,
okay.
but I took it just for what it was on face value, without just really kind of meditating about strife.
I
And
mean, can you really take the word strife and the word God as at face value?
oh, and
I
and,
mean,
and put them together. Well, see, that's the thing. I don't put a lot. I can take it in its context of just the words to itself. I don't
okay.
have to almost feel offended or
You don't
about.
go into 15 different levels of abstraction. Like you don't go into like
That's right.
linguistics. Got it.
Well, because this is, I think it gives me the idea that I can understand that particular perspective, and I can kind of just roll with that. So I
So,
mean,
so
like,
what is so what is the perspective? Like, let's take a minute because then I want to hear about Ben Shapiro and a bunch of other
yeah.
fun
So
conversations.
just the idea that, and you started to elaborate on it a little bit, and I started to meditate about the idea of how important suffering is, and bearing it in terms of responsibility and all the wisdom that comes from that we've been elucidating, that we've been kind of unpacking with suffering. And I think there's a lot of wisdom there, that can't be explained away. I did have a friend years ago that, funny enough, I guess, was a pretty hardcore materialist Marxist. So this adds to Cal's point here. But I mean, when he would get into a philosophical debate and argument with me, he'd say, "Well, my fundamental axioms are that we are fragile creatures on a hostile planet," and so
Well,
um,
I would say there's a lot of truth to that.
yeah, but that he would lead into this type of thing, that we're suffering, and then you're um, even the goodness that happens, that emerges from the suffering and the pain, and making that through, and then galvanizing and coming together as a community. And so it depends how it's like, maybe I look at things more optimistically, like I think, oh, okay, I could see how you could spin that. I could see
Right,
how
right.
how that could work. And um isn't that a little bit of an opposite thing, right? Like, you characterized it with nihilistic, and yet I'm doing something different with it. I'm not using it from a nihilistic standpoint,
Okay.
because there's no avoidance from how I approach things, which, my bias or my hubris is one of like optimism, and I see the good in people, and even in that particular statement, I think, oh yeah, I could see how even good qualities could emerge from that suffering, right?
I think
And
optimism is always going to be a byproduct of like having trained yourself to think positively of the world. And also, if you have to live in this world where, you can check out, but if you're going to be here, you might as well make it as joyful as possible. And you don't need any God for that. Like, just the instinct of man is to survive. The instinct of man is to thrive, to perpetuate life, to continue living and live the most optimally as we know how. I think that's just an instinct, a healthy instinct. If you didn't just interrupt the growth of the person too traumatically at a young age.
And let me add to that just like there's this word senescence, and from a evolutionary biological standpoint, we have this like programmed cell death. And something that really fascinates me is the research that goes around the evolutionary nature and description of what and the conditions for religious thought, right? So in a Jewish tradition, I know that even the word of Yahweh, right, is something that is not even, it's like, I don't know if it's described as something that the Jews shouldn't even say, but it's like we don't even know what the word, it's like we can't even utter it from our mouths properly, right? And so
yeah, I mean, that statement is so overused, in my opinion, in the secular world. In Judaism, you have like, there's so many different names to God, like so many, and attributes and different contexts and different way of looking at it. And yes, there's certain words that we didn't use outside of like particular times and particular places because of its sanctity. But it's like, today, where we're living in a world where quantum mechanics could blow your mind if you just studied it, to how what we think is solid is not actually solid. How are we spinning in the orbit as fast as we are and still exist? And how the conditions that need to exist for life, if 1 degree, if something is off by 1 degree, we just burn into it, we cease to exist. And we live in this little planet with histories and memories and stories and narratives. And it's like, the reason why I'm going off on a tangent with like seemingly a million different things that don't matter. It's like, okay, so we understand in religion that there's certain words that we don't utter, that we don't use, because you have to understand it in the right context. And you have to, some things are not just used as words, meaning you don't just want to read a menu, you want to actually eat the meal. So some words are like, they're pointing to an experience that you have to be in a proper condition to grok, to grasp, to experience, to be in it. So just using it outside of context is kind of like apple on a menu. It's like, do you now have the experience of apple? No. At best, you might have a conception of it. You might just be reading it because you know the semantics, you know the words of it. It's okay. The statement that you just made, oh, Yahweh, the certain words that Jews don't use, that it's like, it's given so much credence. It's almost like, oh, the certain words we can't say because he's so holy. It's just like, no, you just not, the code is not going to work if you're putting the wrong key in the wrong door at the wrong time, upside down, and willing it into it to work. It's just not going to work because there's a proper context and a proper condition, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, that have to be lined up in order to have the experience of the thing unlocking. So yeah, certain words can be this encryption, and encryption is just, it's the nature of encryption. We don't care about your opinion. It's not like, oh, I don't like the fact that it's not working when I want it to work. It's like, well, use it properly. It's like what does that statement even mean? It's like, oh,
no. I actually wanted to agree with you in something, to say that there's a human nature that presupposes even the words itself, that you're describing what it means to actually be human. And so that is kind of where I was leading with this, is that I could say I'm not a spiritual man, or I don't hold a faith in a Christian sense, or in a Jewish sense, or in a Baha'i faith sense, or any.
But would you say that, like, the argument that Jordan Peterson would often have, would you even say that you even have a choice in the matter? Meaning how you think, your very brain is conditioned in a Judaic Christian moralistic value of a narrative in the world. It's like you don't go out there and like hunt the way we used to hunt or interact with. I mean, I can give you a million different examples of different times in history. Our moral compass and the norm was so different. You wake up every day with a particular worldview, and you're embedded in it, and you're like, wow, I don't really know if I'm religious. Like everything about you is religious.
Well, yeah, yeah. You're such a fast thinker, Cal. So okay, so yes, I that's not entirely where I was going, but we'll go there. My only point was that there's certain base conditions that the human experience is described through religion, right? So that I agree with. Now, to focus it as Jordan Peterson does on a Judeo-Christian standpoint, I take exception to this, and I'm not trying to cause a fight or anything, but my exception that I take to, because this caused me an issue when I started to understand what Jordan Peterson was saying, and quite frankly, same as Shapiro, because he stumped Steven Pinker in the same sort of context where he said, "Do you not disagree that we're living in a Judeo-Christian culture, and you can't escape from that?" Right. And he had no comment. Right? It's like, yeah,
no defense.
No defense to that. But there is a particular kind of apologetic that Jordan Peterson is preaching, in my opinion, that I would like to see him go further back.
What does that mean by an apologetic stance?
So an apologetic means that he's trying to say that there's he's preaching a compatibility between our current I guess secular narrative and the reality of something fundamental, something
like rudimentary.
Exactly, right? Because he's saying it's like stop
and show the comparison in religion.
Yeah, exactly. Don't throw this away. Be careful. You don't throw away 3, 4, 5,000, 10,000 years of tradition. You can't. It's actually, you don't have the ability.
But your argument is only going to be like if he is trying to bring validity to Christianity and Judeo-Christian theology. What if it was the other way around? What if he's trying to communicate, hey, you are so... You spend so much time living in the secular world, and you're spending so much time dissecting the sciences. Like, wouldn't the things that we found true in the science validate this thing that we've known for so long, and vice versa? Meaning, if it took you so many years to come to certain understandings within the sciences, and now we're like, the scientific method, for an example. And if all of a sudden you found points in doctrine of a few thousand years ago, before the scientific method was something that we used, and all of a sudden, I guess we can go into so many different examples. It's like, if all of a sudden you find, the way we think, what makes the most logical sense today as a given, we see we see the parallels in this doctrine from quote unquote prehistoric times, or take 3,000 years ago. Wouldn't one? I don't know if I'm articulating it right. It's mostly like saying, doesn't that prove that this doctrine has validity and we shouldn't do away with it if we can see that we're now coming to similar conclusions to thousands of years ago? I don't know if I'm articulating right. Meaning he's not trying to push down your throat the doctrine. He's mostly like, hey, there's something to be said. Like, you look at Freud's world, you look at Jung's world, and you look at all these like ideals from in modern time, individuals, thought leaders, or pioneers in the different sciences come to certain conclusions about the nature of self, and you're like, religion has been saying that for thousands of years. Like, is it because these individuals were influenced by religion, or is it because we're discovering, quote unquote, truths that religion has been communicating for so many years.
Right. Okay. Look, I'm okay with that, and I even look at somebody like a Jung, right? And I think that I'm not really a fan of psychoanalysis or Jung's theories. I'm not really. I actually prefer, in terms of psychology. There's a I don't know why his
Rogerian.
name, Contrarian? No. That's not that.
Rogerian. Carl
Rogers?
Carl Rogers.
No, but anyways, I think the thing is that you know what, the concept that popped into my mind was actually a false idol, right? So if we spend a lot of time fixating on someone like an academic like Carl Jung, or we'll just use Carl Jung for an example, right? Or Sigmund Freud, for example. If the fundamental truths are in religion, then this actually appears from a secular standpoint a false idol, a false worship, a kind of like, just spend your time, you know, in studying religion, you'll come to the same conclusions, right? And so even the way you're describing it, to say, well, if you study this and you come to the same conclusion, you're using a very secular language, in fact, right? And I'd say, well, why not go back to just focus on the orthodoxy of the book that is part of your faith, and say that's all I need.
I mean, that's the question that here between Jordan Peterson, what I hear him always communicate is like, well, maybe the Bible is this collection, the collective consciousness of humanity, told over a long period of time. And according to Judaism, we actually believe almost the opposite. We believe in the mass revelation of Mount Sinai, where millions of people heard the same revelation, which then became the Jewish religion. Very, very interesting. And you can almost say that maybe that's a language thing. Maybe like it wasn't an internal revelation that came from what we would consider above. But what is above? Above means just the ideal. It means the ultimate. Like, I mean, that's how we orient ourselves. It's like there's me, and then there's a little bit better, and then there's a little bit better, and there's a lot better, and then just like this ultimate. It's like so up high. Like, is it high or is it so deep down? That's a conversation in itself. But so the thought I thought with regards to suffering, if I had to sum it up in one way, in one word or in one statement, suffering is the byproduct of sin. Drum. So sin being the being off from my intended point. So I was trying to figure out, like earlier, what's one statement that will encapsulate the entire 5 hours of conversation? Because you can go from the collective, you can look at the individual, you can look at the community, you can even look at the infallibility, the decaying nature of the body. Like in its ideal state, it does what it's meant to do in its functionality. That would be the opposite of sin. That would be like, oh, my organs are doing exactly what it's meant to do. When it's all of a sudden not functioning well, it's off from its center point, from its intended functionality, it's now quote unquote living in sin. Well, that would be a weird statement, but would that also be the nature of self? Meaning when somebody's body is functioning well, their mind is functioning well, they're doing well financially, they're doing well emotionally, they're fully integrated, suffering is not felt so much. Somebody dies, all of a sudden now a part of me, my identity, a loved one was hurt, died, all of a sudden my emotional functionality is now off. It's living in sin. Then it goes back into acceptance. It goes into celebration. It goes into seeing the totality of life. All of a sudden I'm suffering less. So you can go from it's perceived versus real. You can go the collective. You can go all through history, meaning maybe there's something within our DNA or something in our collective consciousness that you and I don't get to choose, meaning X amount of people were murdered in the Holocaust, X amount of people were murdered in in Africa, X amount of people were murdered wherever, and I'm a part of that tribe, I don't get to choose if I'm going to experience the suffering or not, because it's already in my DNA. Meaning my people at some point in the past went through something that was not naturally intended for them at that particular time. Death, infliction by somebody else. So one way of saying it, suffering is living in sin, and not as a value judgment, just as the very nature of like, is my body, is my mind, is my environment functioning at its optimum versus not. And the versus not will be where the suffering will be living.
Okay, and so there's in that, this is really fascinating. So there's a ubiquity of sin that happens at a cultural level that's completely inescapable. And so let's just say, just an argument's sake, say technology is sinful, it leads to whatever. Okay, I'm using it as example because it's entirely, and can kind of be taken, even philosophically, people take it a different way, right? Like, but let's say that this is the through which we live, and say that ultimately it puts a tinge of sinfulness on our existence in our society. Well, then I'd be blind to that, and I'd be perpetuating that sinful thought because I can't get behind it. And I would then think that
I'm trying to think if it's how you're speaking or if your connection is a bit off. So I think you're breaking off.
Oh,
that's probably
the. But
bandwidth.
But there would be certain sinful conditions that actually presuppose any activity that could do, or any willful activity, if you want to look at it that way. And so there's certain conditions of culture that just presuppose a cloud of sinfulness or suffering that is inevitable, right? I mean, use the Holocaust as the example, right? I mean, you can't, after the Holocaust, I think there were, poets that said, how can there be even poetry after the Holocaust? And maybe there was just a time period where there couldn't be.
I mean, there is despair. That's a real thing. That's a version of intense suffering. There is rage. That could be a byproduct of intense suffering. I mean, there's a lot of it's the same when you have an ulcer. I mean, it's the same when you have a heart attack. It's the same when you have any organ internally or any organ externally, when it's ruptured, compromised, you get many different reactions at different times. But the less philosophical conversation is going to be, what is suffering? Well, suffering is a really good indication that I should look at it. The lights in the car is going off and it's blinking and it's making sounds. It's not time to meditate on it. It's time to attend to it.
Okay. And I have the perfect segue, and it's something we disagree on. So I want to talk about climate change, my friend.
I know so little about it, but talk.
I was rather disappointed.
Well, we do agree. We do agree that the climate is changing. I think we might disagree with how much is caused by man and what can we do to impact it, and are the current ways that the powers that be are suggesting that we do something about it, are those going to help with the goal of making the world a better place, healthier place, or is it actually doing the opposite? So it's methodology that we might disagree, not that I mean, we all know we are a part of this living organism, and we're constantly affecting it. Are we affecting it more than in the past, and to what degree, and so on and so forth?
Okay, so let me point out there's a denialist kind of talking point that you hit on first, and I'd like to gloss over that, because you've mentioned that you don't know a lot about it, and I want you to, let's just pretend for a minute. Let's pretend that the scientists and IPCC, this is the smartest people that we have on our planet, say that it's man-made, okay, and we have a big problem. The IPCC report from just came out this week, and it's not looking good. So I don't want to spend any time talking about whether or not it's man-made or not. I want to just pretend, for the sake of the conversation, that it's entirely man-made. And
entirely man-made is the dumbest statement to be made ever. I mean, and I'll tell you why. Entirely man-made is assuming that in 3,000 years ago that volcanoes weren't existing. It's making the assumption all the farting of animals. You're making the assumption that solar wasn't affecting the environment. The list goes on.
Right. Okay, let me back up. Let me rewind the tape.
So entirely man. It's like, what do you mean? It's like, obviously, if me as an individual affect my environment in one way, 8 billion are going to affect the environment a lot more. So obviously, man is affecting the environment. But to say all of the suffering, all of the bad in the environment is caused by man is like, what are you talking about? It's not like you're living in a nothing world. It's an empty world, and the man shows up and fucks it all up. It's like, what are you talking about?
Right. Okay.
Animals have been killing each other forever.
Yeah, I need to rewind that. Choose my entirely is not correct. Okay. So how do I choose those words a little bit better?
The only way you can choose it is to make sure that it's accurate. And I don't know if we have the data in front of us. Maybe you do. So I'm going to stop interrupting you.
Well, I don't want to get caught in the weeds on that, right? I want to put some faith into the scientists that
I don't have any faith in the scientists.
Okay.
Too many groups of scientists in the last few years came out saying things that were completely impacted by politics and not so much by the sciences.
But Kal, here's my point, is that I think if we could move past this point, right, and say that, because I'm not trying to get like caught up in that, because this is
okay,
this
so
is
let's
a narrative of denial.
Let's assume that our trustworthy scientists, let's say they're truthful, they're not impacted by ulterior motives. Okay, so let's say, so what are they saying?
That's actually brings to your next point, which I do think there's some validity to it. It's what do we do about it?
Yeah.
Right. So I see that the science is good science, that the science is accurate, that just by the sheer numbers of the various different scientific bodies and the consensus that's all converging on this problem that we have. So that I'm okay with. I think that at the heart of what a Shapiro argument is, or where I had respect for him, is that what we do about it is different, right? So if it means suspending rights and freedoms and I guess causing disproportionate amount of suffering, or like that's the big question, is how do we get there?
Have you ever watched and dissected the apparatus around the Paris Climate Accord? Meaning, who's paying into it, who's making decisions, what are the environmental, the green taxes, who's benefiting from it, who is actually following through with their commitments? Have you ever studied that? That would be a really good place to start, because all the biggest players in this conversation on a geopolitical level would be a really good lens to go into.
Yeah, but Kal, okay, before we go into that, I mean, it's can you not, you could say follow the money. That's essentially what you're doing. And where is the money?
Follow the money, the intention, and does it deliver on what its initial premises are? Meaning, if we do this insane overhaul of changing the energy that we're using in the world, I mean, obviously we can use nuclear, but for some reason people are just stupid about that. So let's say we don't touch nuclear, we go to solar only. But meanwhile, do what the extreme left is trying to do with the rest of civilization. First, let's destroy it, and let's not come up with a good solution while we're destroying it. Let's just destroy it first, hoping that really smart people are going to merge out of nowhere. We're like, why aren't we hearing about them right now with alternatives? There are ways that we can mitigate a lot what's happening if people were opening to new ideas and actually looking, okay, if I put X amount of money and time towards this issue, is it delivering what we are wanting for it to deliver? Meaning, is it giving us the particular outcomes that they're claiming that they want? So first of all, get a few better spokespeople than the idiots, Bernie Sanders and AOC. Like, find actually articulate human beings that can articulate what they're talking about. And then people that can actually figure out what it will take to create global change. But you just have a bunch of idiots that are, it almost feels like they're so bored and they're so full of suffering that even their own actions don't demonstrate what they're preaching. So it's almost like
yeah, so, that's come up before. It's like then that goes into
so Peterson's what I would say is, like, let's get really concrete. What's the one thing that you identify as global warming? Where is that data coming from? What are the solutions that people are suggesting? And how is it going to impact people? I'm not saying that the status quo is the solution. What I am saying is that some of the largest proponents today around this issue are just idiots. Like, they're not even fucking intelligent. Like, idiots. All they're saying, like, well, the quote AOC kind of being like, well, when the world is going to disappear in 12 years, who can even talk about costs? Almost like saying, who can even talk about logic? It's like, let's suspend logic. Let's suspend mathematics. Let's suspend science. Let's just blow it all up because we are in a dire situation. It's like, there are the Elon Musks of the world. There's some really smart people in the world that are solving some really big issues. You really can find better human beings that can speak to the issue.
I think you're painting the whole. I guess you're kind of characterizing what I think to be the kind of the lefty lunacy archetype, right? Like,
yeah, but it's like, right? Where are the others? Like, I would ask you, give me some. There are people on the right or center right that are looking at the same issues, have studied the very research papers produced by the UN, and we're like, wow, if the United States did everything the left told us to do or are telling us to do, and we went completely all natural, well, that's not the right statement, all solar, let's say, we won't even create a dent in the world.
Look, I get all that. Okay, so then there's somebody that's very kind of close to this inner circle that you're even part of. I host a series weekly with Professor Steve Keen, post-Keynesian economist, very smart guy.
And what is he suggesting as a solution? Or is he still defining the problem?
No, we need to limit our carbon, period. And so it's going to rip us back to pre-1960 lifestyles. And it
okay.
Well, no, I know, because
I would love to. Yeah, I should listen to him and read his stuff a bit more. What's the logic? Well, if we live in a global world, which we do,
yeah,
we have no power whatsoever within current status. Like today, we have no power on what China, North Korea, Russia does. Well, very limited power on influencing them. India, we have a lot more influence on, and Pakistan, and I don't know about Pakistan, certainly India, given that they're a friend to the West. So you're looking at countries that are destroying, that are adding so much toxins to the world, to the planet. Even if we gave, like what's the cost? You give up military might, you give up dominance in every domain. You're making yourself vulnerable to be destroyed in 17 ways from tomorrow. And then you're like, oh, but we potentially did something that we contemplated, meditated, thought, hypothesized that it's going to be really cool and it's going to work in the next 60 years into the future, assuming that the rest of the world does the same. You're just like, what? You're like, what?
No,
like, what's the cost?
You're onto something that I think is something that even so now we can converge on something that I think is
there is a narrative on the problem, but it's like, what's the cost? Annihilation? Because
their standpoint is that if we don't do this, we're heading towards an extinction event. That it's simply
that. I don't believe it, not by the slightest.
Yeah. But here's the point.
But
I think
again, I'm so ignorant. I know so little. So it's like if a scientist is saying stuff, I'm like, hopefully he's using terms and ideas that I can kind of put my teeth into, and I would love to.
yeah, but I mean, here's where I think we're converging here. This is where it even starts to get fuzzy for me, and then I want to return to the suffering part, right? Because is that I think if we go back through history, there's never been a global unified effort on anything, right? So, um,
Well, there's been a unified effort to annihilate each other. That's been
yeah.
consistent.
But
Yeah.
so what I'm saying is that I see there's going to be unprecedented amount of suffering, and so there's a book by David Wallace Wells, okay, and he's saying that the level of suffering and death that's on our doorstep is several orders of magnitude greater than the Holocaust, and so
Yeah,
you know what that means.
and I don't think that has anything to do with environmental issues. I think that has to do with global powers, economic disaster that is looming. Um, yeah,
Pause
you're
there
looking at
for a minute.
a lot of factors that I don't think it's
No,
environmental.
I get that. Okay, so let's pause. And what do you mean environment? Like, what do you mean economic?
What
Like,
I mean about it's like what we have seen in the last 100 years is the better the GDP of a particular country, the less poverty, the less suffering, and the less they are polluting. That's undisputed. So make people freer, bring the free economy to more countries,
yes,
unify
burn
around
more
that.
oil, burn more oil, keep burning more oil, and
Not
burn more oil, and
necessarily, not
increase.
necessarily. Create nuclear plants all over the world and use nuclear energy, and
But
it
you need to
doesn't
burn
necessarily.
oil to build the plants, though, Cal. Here's the point: it's inevitable. You have to understand that it's like we've got a planet it's sealed, and it's like you've got a
Okay,
tube going
but
into the planet.
if you're now going toward don't even do that because you're burning. So how about all the talking heads of the international community stop flying in their fucking jets everywhere while talking about climate change,
I agree with
and
that.
people that have interests that they can make millions of dollars based on what they're spewing should not have the right to spew it. So when we start seeing some of the fundamentals that people that are talking about X solution actually have the people in mind, best interest in mind, rather than what they're going to profit, maybe
Yeah.
we'll be able to start listening to people being like, wow, you actually care about the world. We should listen to you and show me how it's going to benefit the world. So at the very moment, every solution offered, and I might be wrong, but that's my sense, that the majority of things that are offered as solutions just benefit a few very wealthy people. Doesn't actually
Yeah.
help, doesn't actually change anything with regards to polluting the world.
I mean,
It's like
on
virtue
both sides of
signaling,
that.
like in people's veins. It's like they just get a dose of like, oh, I feel superior. A dose of like, oh, I've contributed to the world, you idiots. All the bottles that you put into the recycling doesn't actually go to recycling. They're just sitting in big fields and rotting away and eating at the planet. You're just
Yeah.
an idiot. You think you just did the world a good place, and you shame other people for it, and you keep recycling. And we have entire countries, like, let's figure out what to do with our waste problem. And I believe, I actually know a guy who started a company in Florida and know new scientists, and they were working on God, what's the word I'm looking for? Like solutions of how to get rid of waste and actually turn it into things that we can use, energy sources that we can use in cars, and instead of I think we have enough resources from intelligence standpoint and money to come up with solutions for the major things in this world. But I don't actually think that the people that are spewing climate change alarmism actually care about the world. It has more to do with their egoic stupidity and then their sense of self in the world, and making up, back to the toxic mimic idea, making up for the lack of spine that they fucking have, or the emptiness in their fucking soul that they are just trying to make up for. It has nothing to do with actually
I
changing
know,
the
but it's
world.
like, okay, welcome Cal to the show, and it's like we got three other climate guys. So I'm one of these climate guys, right? And if we didn't know each other, at what point would you get to how long of a conversation would you have to, get to understand that that's not my motive?
True. That's why
Right?
I said, I'll go back to what I said 15 minutes ago. Let's figure out what the thing is. What is the problem? What can we actually do to change it? And if we did that, would it actually create the appropriate change? And to what end? To save planet Earth? Maybe planet Earth is not meant to be saved. Maybe this planet was never appeared in the solar system to exist for eternity. Maybe. Have you ever thought of that? Maybe the body wasn't meant to live forever. Like, we're so busy like shooting crack cocaine, like virtue signaling into each other's communities, that we're like, how about you fucking clean your room, be nice to your family, stop being a liar, contribute to the world in ways that actually make sense. If you're in politics for the wrong reason, go jump off a building or get a job, or like there's a million places to start before. No, let's tax everyone, destroy all organizations and industries and companies for what? So some people get rich. It's like, what is the actual solution? What is the problem and what is the solution?
Yeah. So I think the thing is that, because I that's a very simplistic way to say it. What is the problem? What is the solution? And then unless you answer
complex problem. It's a very complex
yes,
problem.
to a very complex problem. And so what if you say we don't have the answer, we don't know, but what we do know is that carbon is killing us.
I don't know if that's true.
No, but I'm saying you got to give me that just for the point of the conversation, right?
Because maybe the trees need all the carbon we're producing.
Sorry, what's that?
Maybe all plants and trees need the carbon that we are actually producing. Maybe that's what's creating the oxygen we're breathing. That's not even an agreed upon statement, that the carbon that we're producing is destroying us. That's not even.
I'm trying to stay out of the denial. I'm trying to just stay out of the weeds of the denial talk. Okay?
I'm not afraid of the word denial. All I'm saying is, how much carbon are we producing, and is it actually true that the carbon that we are producing is destroying the world?
It is absolutely true. But it's absolutely true.
Okay, how do we know that?
It's pardon me?
How do we know that?
The IPCC.
Okay, I'm gonna take some notes. Would you send me that report that you're referring to?
It just came out. It's the second It's the most recent IPCC report, and then also, and you go back, to the limits of growth. This was done in the 70s, and it was done by MIT scientists, engineers, mind you. Okay, so when you look at the places that are recognizable, that are trustworthy, engineers, MIT, these aren't guys, spewing left-wing politics and feel-good narratives. This is like, hey guys, there's a problem here. And you know who agreed with them?
Who was that?
The engineers and the scientists that worked for the oil companies. They're like, yeah, there's a problem here. We don't know how to fix it. We didn't know how to fix it in the 70s. We knew it was a problem. We continued on status quo.
IPPC?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
IPCC. And it's the intergovernmental.
IPCC, not IPPC. Okay.
And so they just came out with the report, and it doesn't.
Are they giving us 12 years or 15 years? How many years are they giving us?
Well, that's not really the point. We need to stop doing this. This is like unequivocal. This is the issue, and the problem is
I think we should solve the garbage problem before we solve the energy problem.
The garbage problem.
Yeah, we're producing so much garbage in this world, and it's toxic.
I'm okay to switch the conversation in that regard too. I think we consume too much ridiculous stuff. But then again, Cal, it comes back to your point about GDP. How do you need a different mechanism? GDP means you produce more garbage. That's what it means. It's producing crap. Do you need? Okay, look, live in alternative.
It also means it doesn't necessarily mean crap. I mean, if a particular country is growing fruits and vegetables and is selling it and is making more money for its GDP, it's not crap.
No, that's
just you're developing nations.
No. But there's a lot of stuff. Okay, you come from a community that is, however ironic this sounds, it's not orthodox. It is orthodox. It
It's
is a
very
different.
organized.
You guys, your community is different, right?
Yes,
Okay.
they're still
Now
in the 1960s.
we all need to go back there. That's all I'm saying. We
Okay,
don't need
with
two
what?
and three
So
vehicles.
okay, granted.
We
We
don't
get
need to
rid
be
of our
buying a lot of useless stuff. I would rather everybody sitting around reading the Bible or reading literature or
said the
honestly,
non-religious guy. Yeah,
no, but hey, what did I tell you last week? What was I
yeah,
doing with my son? I was sitting there and reading it. I read it.
sure, sure.
I love it. There's no problem. It's another book, just like just like Plato's dialogues. Is there wisdom
Yeah,
in it? Yes, there is.
you're saying we should spend less time running away from our nature and just producing and destroying the planets and be a lot more intentional. That the motive shouldn't be profit. The motive should be
Well,
usefulness.
I'm not against profit, but the thing is right now the what has delivered us this unprecedented level of decadence and prosperity has also polluted our planet to unprecedented levels. And we cannot continue on this trajectory. And that was what was brought up by the MIT scientists in a paper called Limits to Growth. And it was from the 1970s, from MIT. And this is something that now has 50 years of track record. It's not like, well, let's come up with a hypothesis and check it. We've had that for 50 years.
Right.
And so what we're saying is that there is a limit to growth the way we look at it right now. And I just think that our disposable economies, what we value in terms of products, they don't do anything to bring families.
Me personally, I would not mind a world where we're sitting in the trees around the fire, singing, connecting with each other, eating healthy food, not eating junk food. I mean, everyone would benefit from it. There'll be less suicides, less obesity, less accidents, less medical mishaps if people are actually healthier.
And you think about the people that are profiting from, like the car companies, right? This is a major mechanism for a healthy economy, at least in a North American economy, right? Like how many housing starts, how many cars are being produced, look, that's the problem. We have a housing crisis, but does every single family need to have, does every young couple need to have their own house?
I want to live in an ashram. Well, ashram-like style. I want to live with multiple families.
Exactly. You want to look at, we have to look at being more resilient and figure out ways that we can cooperate and I think, right, in order to, the option isn't to spend our way out of this and produce our way out of this.
Go into more debt. And yeah, I mean, our people, I mean, when we spoke last, what was it, Daniel, remember that podcast I shared with you?
Yeah.
From on LinkedIn, was doing a lot of really great stuff, thinking up some of the major problems in the world, global issues, and how to solve them. I mean, there are really smart people that are at this. Sadly, it's not coming from any of the politicians we currently know.
I will tell you this, that Professor Steve Keen came up with this idea. Actually, he didn't come up with the idea, but there's something called global carbon credit. And it's a currency that's supposed to be issued by
that's the whole concept around the climate, the Paris Climate Accord. That's a concept that is embedded in that world of like, you pay an X amount of tax toward how much you're adding to global pollution. Is that what you're referring to?
I kind of think maybe not. What it means is that you and I get basically this currency that's coming. Okay, now the people who are going to, and so for the average person, he's saying that you can't take more from the poor. You can't do that, right? So if you want to talk about helping the most amount of people, this is going to get it there. Okay, you can't take more from the poor.
Yeah.
And for the majority of people, we don't spend past our carbon limit, right? We don't use more carbon than I guess would be like a fair amount, I guess, right? But for that particular executive that decides just to fly around to Vegas for the sake of, flying around to Vegas just for a weekend, well, that's going to be very expensive for him or her or however they choose to identify, right?
Right.
So
You're
they're
saying
going to have
you're punishing and incentivizing for people to be conscious around environmental issues that, their actions impact their environment. And if they're going to add a bunch of, you want to basically you want to incentivize them for them not to do so.
Ridiculous uses of carbon. If you as an individual want to blow through your, fair amount of carbon just because you want to and you've got a lot of money,
right,
you're going to have to pay for it, and you're going to have to pay for it big time, right?
And hopefully that money goes to make the world healthier and not to individuals or organizations.
No, because the people like you and I, we put our extra, like if I don't use my carbon credits, my carbon currency, I can sell it on a market. So it doesn't go back to somebody. It doesn't go back to a corporation.
Yeah,
it's not a money grab.
If that concept was decentralized, I would be more comfortable with it. If it was managed by the very people that finance wars and corrupt entire countries, not a chance.
Does the World Bank do that though? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
World Health Organization, the World Bank. Yeah, if you if you decentralized it, that it's not the Gores and the Clintons and the, I don't know who else you would go, like the people running the EU.
Gores and Clintons don't really go together, but but what you're saying
Gore.
is like the elites.
No, the elites, the talking heads, the people that have like 17 NGOs and nonprofits that are like, so Saudi Arabia can put millions of dollars in there. It's like, oh yeah, they're saving the world. It's just go fuck yourself. It's like, you have no right to even be in this conversation. Your only vote to this conversation is not virtue or sincerity, or the only right to this conversation is because you're powerful and corrupt. It's like, no, thank you. I'm not taking any advice from you anytime soon.
Yeah, so I think the conversation kind of got a little out of hand. I'm trying to think, how do we bring this back to suffering?
What is suffering?
Suffering but the point about the suffering and the suffering that is to come is that I'm going to pretend I'm like a prophet in this conversation, just between me and you. I'm telling you, man, it is coming, and it is coming in a big way. Everything in my being is pointing towards that, saying, I see it.
And I'm going to tell you in my prophecy that you will have massive amount of civil war before that's implemented.
Right.
Every freedom-loving American and every freedom-loving citizen of the world will not allow this to come about. We will see the annihilation of our world as we know it before that's instituted. Because every time in the past that we took advice from feel-good, virtue-signaling people on the left, which is usually these conversations are driven by the academia, in the name of, oh, we want to make your life better, but we're going to empower ourselves, enrich ourselves, corrupt ourselves at the expense of your freedom, you will see civil war in every free country.
Oh, it's so concerning, man. Oh,
it is. That's why I said there's more concerning things on the planet, because you have 17 conversations to take place prior to that even being the actual conversation. So have it done by actual freedom-loving people. Have it done by not by what's the word I'm looking for? Not by let me manipulate you. Not by like, oh, I'm doing this for you. Like I'm doing it. This is for your good. Do it by actually sound logical people on both sides of the aisle and come up with solutions that actually are like, you want to change the world? Okay, how about we start with a city? Oh, you want to change the world? How about we start with a neighborhood? Oh, you want to change the world? How about we start with a family? Like, if you can show me that it works with a family, then I'll go, okay, let's create a city around it. And if it works in a city, like they're not even interested in talking about how they're going to change their lives, the talking heads, and those are the people that are telling the story. So You have to go to the people that are telling the narrative, not the scientist that is sitting in a basement and he's right about his research and he really feels strongly about it. We don't care about that guy because he's not going to do anything. We only care about him if his studies and if his logic and his findings can go to the people that can communicate it to the masses and then actually implement it. So let's go to the people that are talking to the masses to implement it, and then let's actually start creating change. I'm all for it.
I did think of it this way in terms of incentive, right? And so that's why I started this podcast that was called COVID and Climate Correlations. That's the one with Steve Keen. Okay.
Yeah.
And so the correlation that I was bringing up is between COVID and the fact that there was some commentary from people about COVID, and when this happened, it may have been an opportunity for people to slow down, connect with family, slow their lives down a little bit.
A lot of people that did that. I mean, there's a lot of sane people that took advantage of it, and a lot of insane people that used it as cause for more suffering.
Right. Okay. So all I was saying is like, I envision, I say you have to put a proper incentive for, and I think this is kind of where you're going. I mean, maybe not intentionally, but I see this as kind of a win-win scenario. Is that the average American, the average Canadian, the average global citizen has to realize that there's incentive enough for them to be able to stay at home effectively, contribute to their community, put more equity into their family, and less into the jobs and the production. And so I think.
Okay, and how do you go about it? Because I don't hear an incentive. I hear like we're going to create a barbed wire, an electric barbed wire around your house, and guess what? If you do want to leave, you're going to be electrocuted. So do yourself a favor, live in pleasure, and live in peace. Don't leave your house. That's not an incentive.
No,
that's penalization.
Yeah, but okay, the world does change. I mean, I'm not saying that my idea of being able to fly all around the world and do everything and anything that I wanted to do. Yeah, I think the world's going to change, and I think that is a world of the past. I think we have to be more conscious of what we're doing and realize that if this idea of a global currency came out, a global carbon currency, there's more than enough money for us to eat healthy food, spend more time with family.
But the conversation you're having is the cousin of global communism. It's like, I hear you with regards to if the whole world, if there was no God and there was no religion and we were all singing Kumbaya and got rid of every national anthem and John Lennon's song was the national anthem of the world.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, Cal. Here, I want to explain a little bit more. The global carbon currency is supposed
to don't get rid of sovereignty, nation state sovereignty.
No, because your global currency is actually pegged off of your average. Like if you're an American citizen, I think the way this works, right? I'm still learning about it, and it makes a lot of sense to me that if the average income for the American is $58,000 a year, and for a Canadian it's 48, then that's what we work with, right?
Well,
and if in
average,
Zimbabwe,
in New York and California it's 150, and in Alabama it's 29. It's like the disparity is enormous.
Right. Well, so I mean, yeah, I don't know. Again, this is maybe for smarter people to figure out where to draw the line and how to, because I know what you're saying. It's like, I'm not trying to make it a big commune, right? This is something that's kind of scary, and history has shown that doesn't, entirely work that well. So, but
I'm saying like this entire conversation is more like how to, it only addresses maybe one issue, which is like, how do you add less pollution to the world when you incentivize people not to add more? But we still have the problem as it is today. Like, how do you actually fix the problems that we currently have? Those problems are not going to be fixed with what we're currently adding or not adding. In my humble opinion, I could be so wrong. I think it's going to be fixed by solutions that are found of how to clean up the environment, how to clean up the ocean. I like to think the way Jordan Peterson does in the sense that we had an ozone problem that we've only been engaged. Like, think about the history of humanity. We've only been engaged of how to impact, change substantially our environment in the last 60 years. It's such a small time that man has been around and contemplated with tools, technology, resources to impact our environment positively. And we've made so much progress in 50, 60 years. So I won't think about it as impending doom. I think we need to define the problems a bit better, communicate it a bit better, not through alarmism, not through penalization, through education and actual data, and have consensus about it and have sane people communicate about it, and then start coming up with more solutions that are, as you would say, incentivizing people, not penalizing people. Creating a global currency of how to get the rich not to do the stupid things that they're doing isn't the solution. Because guess what? They own the media, they own the government, they own all factory resources, they own the world.
Yeah, the only retort that I heard from this lunacy left that you refer to, because I do partake in those circles sometimes.
Sorry to hear that.
But the only retort that I've heard that seems coherent is that they're not disillusioned in terms of where the real power is, and that it lies with the corporations. Right? I mean, the IPCC is a body of scientists that say, here's the science, you guys go and deal with it. So that same mechanism that you're talking about is that they're the scientists saying, here's the problem. We're not telling you how to fix it. You need to go and fix it. This is the problem. By the way,
stop talking to the people that have no power and no influence. You want to change the world? Start with the actual people that can affect it, like the people running corporations, people flying their jets. And so far, they are saying one thing and doing something completely different. Nothing is going to change with that problem.
Yeah, the only answer that I've heard is that they admit, they know that, and these are the lefty guys, the alarmists, I guess, from your perspective. They're saying it's going to come. Real change is actually going to come from the corporations. And the only
why would I believe that global warming is real and it's going to do what the left said it's going to do when the Obama just bought an $8 million, maybe it's 20 million, I don't know the exact number, but millions of dollars of a mansion right on the water. It's like, oh, maybe he doesn't believe that the ocean is going to rise X amount of inches, feet, miles. Like, oh, it's like, you want me to believe you, but everything you're doing is indicating that what you just said is just baloney. So I think we have a moral problem and an ethics problem and a human problem than an environmental problem. Yeah, we have a leadership problem. That I will 100% agree with. So,
but again, their point.
We're going to continue making the Jordan Petersons the celebrities rather than how we continue like looking at decentralized currency and decentralized systems of governance. And hopefully, at one point in the near future, with enough smart people doing what they're currently doing, most people in power today will just cease to exist. They will have no relevance. Oh, you have a lot of money? Who cares? You have a lot of weapons? Who cares? The world has voted against you. From that point, that's an interesting conversation to have. And that's where the conversation will begin. You want to deal with global warming? You want to deal with some of the largest issues in the world? Decentralize it. Get actual competent, smart people to make decisions rather than money-hungry, corrupt politicians.
My vote is for philosopher kings.
My too. Philosopher kings.
Well, wait a minute. What I'm curious about from a Jewish perspective, what if you're, and I know there's a couple bad apples on this apple cart, but what if there's, I mean, for the most part with your community and from an Orthodox Jewish community, would you say that the leaders within your community, would they be good global leaders? I don't know what happened. He either didn't like the question or he's going to come back here. So Cal's back kind of. I think his camera's coming on here, but if he can hear me, I said to the audience before we jumped off, I said, he either just didn't like the question or the battery on his laptop died. Yeah, what a way to go with the final episode of What is Suffering. It's like someone shuts the power off. It's the global authorities just yank the power, and we're kind of stuck. Come on, Cal, you can do it. Plug in your laptop. Plug in your laptop. All right. Well, let me see if I can carry the conversation in a bit of a monologue. You've heard it with us. We disagree a little bit. We come at this from different angles, but I think fundamentally we do agree when we strip it down. I think we do agree, and I'm hopeful that the conversation will actually. There he is. I said to the audience, I said, I think he was very offended with my last question, and he said, I'm out of here.
No, I'm so glad that I was able to log in through my phone. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes, no, we can. And so I want to end this one question with, because we were both in agreement, let's make it Philosopher Kings, and we can, maybe talk about that later. But from your community and the Orthodox Jewish community, and I know there's a few bad apples in that community, as we've discussed in the past, but overall, do you think that they would be good global leaders if we could wave the magic wand?
No.
Really?
Well, not them particular. Maybe within the Orthodox world, but from a very practical standpoint, the community that I grew up in, so many of them are not well informed on some of the basic things that I think you would need to be world leaders. I think so. The answer in a very comical way would be no.
Okay.
You can make an argument that they have many things that really work, like family and spirituality, but my sense that, I'm, to wrap it up, to give people some context, I'm in my parents' home. One, I haven't stayed here for like 6-7 years, and even then I was estranged from them many years before. So it's my first time where I'm sitting in this home and this community, as far as I can tell, resentment free, and really reconnecting with my family and spending time with my siblings. My sister got all 12 of us around the table the other day and got us to write down personal questions, and we're having a great time, spending a lot of time with family. And I'm still running my business and working full 12-hour days, but I'm doing it in a very integrated, healthy way. And this is just a stop in my particular journey. But the conversation about suffering, of like feeling abandoned, feeling neglected, feeling not understood, and experiencing tremendous amount of suffering many years ago. Now I'm actively coming back into the belly of the beast and making friends with my past self. So many things that were like living in the inner crevices of my subconscious, of like things that I remembered of what my childhood was like. I'm now actually seeing it in the external world, in my environment, and I'm looking at it and I'm feeling through it and like engaging with it rather than making it wrong. And so it's been a very healing moment. But the reason I brought all that up is when I look at my father's life, which again is not the life of every single adult in this community, but for the most part, when I look at his life, I see a very monastic life. Like, it's God and service and devotion and religious practices that are literally at the forefront of every walking moment, every breath he takes, from the moment he wakes up until he goes to sleep. And the other things, like the bills or the chores or the other things, are literally like a thing that you get through in order to get back into devotion, service, observance, etc. So like from the moment you open your eyes, him washing his hand right next to his bed, reciting a prayer, to then what he wears and what he eats and how he eats it, and then what he studies and who he studies with, and literally every moment of the day is a very monastic life. Like, I don't think, well, the closest people out in the world that experience what most individuals in this community experience is like living at a monastery, and even that is like light. Like, this is
Mm.
every walking moment of your life. So for as far as it relates to me personally, is like, this is not the life I want. I want to live in the world, and I want to find godliness and coherence and harmony in the modern world, um, and integrate a sense of awe, and integrate a sense of appreciation and gratitude, and integrate a sense of godliness in everything that I do in my day-to-day life, and adding value to people and seeing the best in them, and conduct myself ethically in business, etc., etc. Get right with the world, myself, and all its faults. But to your question, would people living in this community make good global leaders? No. Like, on a very practical level, no. Like,
Okay.
like, there's a particular mannerism that they're not well educated in, or no, they have their big hearts, and they see the world very, very differently than modern culture. Like, it's through the lens 100% of Jewish orthodoxy. Um, but for me, it's a fun place to be, because I know where I stand in my ambitions and curiosities in other topics. So all of a sudden I look at it and I go, wow, here's like 500 men dressed the same exact way, moving in unison to the movement of its leader. And I'm like, I'm just fascinated by the psychology of it all. I'm fascinated by, kind of like, I understand a little bit their orientation to the world because I come from it, but I'm also not in it. So I have the best front row seats to a very interesting show that most people will never get to see, and I'm fascinated by it, and I don't separate myself from it.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think that's a good summary to wrap things up for the final episode, and for the theme of what is suffering. Thanks, and we've enjoyed the ride, Cal. Um, it was just to say thanks, and I think that's going to wrap up our final episode. Despite the technical problems, it was very well said.